Keir Starmer is on the ropes, and Nigel Farage has decided to pull the rope with all his might. The leader of Reform UK has launched a relentless attack on the Labour leader, exposing him as the biggest political fraud in British history. And this is no simple accusation. Farage has made it clear with data, facts, and a warning that echoes through the UK's political landscape. Starmer is not just an opportunist, he is the architect of the great betrayal against the British people. And if anyone thinks they can escape this truth, they'd better pay attention, because May 1st will mark a turning point in the politics of this country. Farage has not minced words. His condemnation has been devastating. The Labour Party is sabotaging democracy. While Starmer parades around with empty speeches and hollow promises, the reality is that his party has maneuvered in the shadows to weaken British institutions, silencing real opposition and turning Parliament into a political theatre where decisions have already been made. The UK did not vote to be governed by faceless bureaucrats, but that is precisely what is happening under Starmer's leadership. Reform UK sees this clearly, and more importantly, is ready to face it head-on. And if you thought the economic situation was bad, just wait until you see the unprecedented destruction Starmer is allowing. Farage has been blunt. The UK is being dismantled from within, its industry devastated, its working class ignored, and its purchasing power reduced to ashes. While millions of Britons struggle to pay their bills, the Labour Party remains obsessed with policies that only benefit globalist elites and the Brussels bureaucracy. Who suffers? You. Your family. Your future. But Starmer doesn't care, because his loyalty is not to the British people, it's to foreign interests and the powerful lobbies that control the country's destiny from the shadows. Farage has sounded all the alarms, and rightfully so. What's at stake here isn't just a political party, but the future of the United Kingdom itself. May 1st will be the first major electoral test since the general elections, and Reform UK is set to shake the system. This will not be just another election. It will be a referendum against Starmer's deception, against his betrayal of British sovereignty, against his policy of national destruction. Because one thing is crystal clear, Starmer does not represent ordinary Britons, he represents the elite who despise them. What Farage has said strikes an uncomfortable but undeniable truth: the Labour Party is no longer the party of the working class. Starmer has transformed it into a servile machine for globalist interests, a tool of mass manipulation that sells false hopes while the country crumbles. There is no growth, no stability, no prosperity, only an empty promise of a future that never arrives. And the worst part is, the Labour Party doesn't even try to hide it. Their strategy is the same as always: deceive the people until it's too late to react. But Farage has been clear: the British people have woken up. They're no longer swallowing the same old game. They're no longer buying the recycled lies that Starmer and his band of bureaucrats have repeated for years. Frustration is real, the anger is undeniable, and change is imminent. Reform UK is not just an alternative, it is the only force capable of halting the disaster that awaits if Starmer gains power without real opposition. May 1st will be the first major blow to Starmer's false leadership. A crucial moment when the British people will have the chance to say enough, to raise their voices and reject the political manipulation that has brought the country to the brink of collapse. Farage has made it clear: this is not just another election, it's a battle for the future of the United Kingdom. And while the Labour Party continues to try to hide its incompetence behind empty promises and pre-scripted speeches, Reform UK is in the streets, in the neighbourhoods, with real people, preparing the ground for a political earthquake that will make history. Starmer has underestimated the strength of a betrayed people, and he will soon discover that there is nothing more dangerous than a nation that has decided to reclaim its destiny. Keir Starmer is not the leader of the opposition, nor the so-called saviour he tries to portray in his empty, predictable speeches. He is a mere pawn of Brussels, a politician without convictions, who would betray his own country in the blink of an eye if it meant gaining favour with the globalist elite. This is the brutal accusation Nigel Farage has levelled mercilessly, and the truth is that every word rings with chilling accuracy. The United Kingdom voted to reclaim its sovereignty in 2016. 52% of Britons defied threats, propaganda, and fear, making it clear that the country didn't want to remain a puppet of the European Union. It was a resounding message, a historic decision. But here we are, years later, with a Labour leader who dreams of reversing it all, who despises the will of the people, and who would do anything to bind the UK back to the clutches of Brussels. Farage has not minced his words. Starmer doesn't work for you, he works for the EU. His loyalty is not with the British people, but with the European bureaucracy, with the political caste that despises your independence and wants to see this country on its knees again. And the evidence is overwhelming. Starmer has spent the past few years subtly suggesting that Brexit was a mistake, that the British economy can only be saved if we return to the fold of the EU. He says it with smooth words, in the typical tone of a politician trying to lull the population with empty promises. But the reality is clear. His plan is simple. He doesn't want to lead a strong United Kingdom. He wants to lead a compliant, submissive, and completely dependent UK that answers to Brussels. But Starmer's betrayal doesn't stop there. Not only is he willing to undermine the country's independence, but he would do so behind the backs of the people, without ever facing them directly. His strategy is insidious. He doesn't propose a new referendum, he doesn't say it outright, but every decision he makes points to the same thing: reversing Brexit without consulting anyone. And if you think this is an exaggeration, just look at his recent moves. Starmer has held private meetings with EU leaders, assuring them that under his leadership, the UK will return to a path of cooperation and stability. And what does that mean in the language of politicians who kneel before Brussels? It means he's setting the stage for a covert reintegration, a gradual return that will be sold as cooperation agreements, mutual commitments, regulatory alignments. Pure camouflage for a master plan to return control of the UK to the bureaucrats that the British rejected nearly a decade ago. Farage has warned with terrifying clarity, Brexit was a battle won, but the war is not over. Starmer and his allies want to take that victory from us. They want to erase what millions of Britons achieved with their vote. We won't let them. And he's right. The British voted for freedom, for the right to decide their own future, and now that right is under threat. Does anyone truly believe that Starmer, a man who has spent his political career defending the values of the European Union, will lead an independent UK? It's a bad joke. His track record is that of a bureaucrat who has never fought for his country's sovereignty but for his own interests. His lack of principles is legendary. One day, he proclaims to be a defender of Brexit because the people's decision must be respected, and the next day, he suggests that we must re-examine our relationship with the EU. A politician without principles, without an ideological backbone, willing to say anything necessary to climb to power. But here's the key question: why is Starmer so desperate to take us back into the EU? The answer is simple and terrifying: because a strong, sovereign UK doesn't fit with the globalist agenda that Starmer and his allies are pushing. For them, the real problem isn't Brexit. The problem is a United Kingdom that makes its own decisions, that controls its economy, that sets its own rules instead of submitting to regulations dictated by Brussels. An independent UK is an obstacle to their plans. And Starmer is more than willing to remove that obstacle. The reality is that the British working class has nothing to gain from a return to the EU. But Starmer and the Labour Party aren't interested in what ordinary people want or need. Their priority is to please the elites, to earn applause from Brussels, to be accepted back into the club of the submissive, of the obedient. And in the meantime, the average Brit will continue to pay the price for their personal ambitions. But Farage has sounded the warning. May 1st will be the first sign that the British people don't forget and don't forgive. It will be proof that the British people will not be sold to Brussels by unscrupulous politicians. And it will be the first of many battles. The issue is no longer whether Starmer plans to betray Brexit. The issue is what the British people will do when they realise what is happening. Farage knows. The real question is, does Starmer know? The silence from Keir Starmer on the migrant crisis is no accident. It's a calculated, dangerous complicit act that puts the security of the British people at risk. Farage, with his usual blunt force, has torn apart Starmer's inaction, accusing him of betraying the national interest in favour of progressive lobbyists and mass immigration. Under the leadership of Starmer, the UK is not just facing an influx of migrants, it is enduring a full-scale invasion that is threatening the very fabric of British society. The working class, those who built this country, are being left to fight for survival as their jobs are undermined, their communities flooded, and their futures uncertain. Meanwhile, Starmer's Labour Party remains utterly silent, not a word of opposition, not a single policy to stop the crisis. Instead, they've chosen to protect and finance the very forces that are destabilizing the nation. Let's face the truth here, Starmer and his party are willing to sacrifice the interests of the British people for the sake of political correctness and their cozy alliance with the globalist elite. The numbers speak for themselves. Immigration into the UK is at record levels, with no real plan from Labour to manage or control it. Farage is right to point out that this isn't just about welcoming migrants, this is about the complete undermining of British sovereignty. Starmer's refusal to take action, his failure to even acknowledge the scale of the problem, is not only irresponsible, it is downright dangerous. While the people of the UK struggle to cope with the consequences of this crisis, Starmer remains locked in his ideological bubble, clinging to the idea that Britain must be open to everyone, no matter the cost. Let's not forget the working-class communities that Starmer claims to represent, communities that are now facing unemployment, pressure on public services, and housing shortages as a result of the relentless flow of migrants. Does Starmer ever acknowledge their suffering? Does he ever take a stand for those people who feel abandoned by his policies? No. Instead, he parrots the same tired, worn-out slogans about tolerance and multiculturalism while the nation falls apart at the seams. It is beyond frustrating to watch. The UK is in crisis, yet the man leading the Labour Party has done nothing but sit on his hands. Farage's anger is justified. This is an invasion, and the fact that Starmer remains so passive speaks volumes about his priorities. The reality is that while the British public cries out for action, Starmer is too busy catering to progressive lobbyists, to the corporations and NGOs that profit from the chaos and exploitation of migrants, and to the global elites who want nothing more than to see the UK surrender its sovereignty for the sake of globalist agendas. But let's not pretend this is a coincidence. This isn't just a failure of leadership, it's a betrayal of the British people. Keir Starmer's Labour Party is actively complicit in the destruction of our borders, our economy, and our way of life. The working class, the real heart of this country, are the ones who are paying the price for this uncontrolled immigration policy, and Starmer is doing nothing to protect them. In fact, his party encourages the very forces that are driving this crisis forward. It is not enough to simply acknowledge the issue. Farage's point is clear: Starmer's failure to act on immigration is a direct threat to national security. The rise in gang violence, the pressure on the NHS, the strains on housing and welfare, these are the consequences of unchecked immigration, and Starmer, by his refusal to tackle this crisis, has effectively endorsed it. The working-class families who have been left behind are the ones paying the ultimate price, with their jobs and livelihoods being put at risk. Meanwhile, Starmer and his Labour Party do nothing but pander to the interests of the elite who benefit from the influx of cheap labour, all while the nation descends into chaos. And here's the real kicker: Starmer knows exactly what he's doing, but he refuses to act. He knows that the Labour Party's alliance with globalist elites and progressive lobby groups is part of the agenda. He knows that mass immigration is driving a wedge through British society, and yet he does nothing to address the problem. Why? Because the Labour Party no longer serves the interests of the British people, and Starmer, as its leader, is fully complicit in this abandonment. This isn't just about the migrant crisis, it's about the complete collapse of a political system that no longer listens to its citizens. It's about a Labour Party that has lost touch with the working class and is now fully aligned with the globalists and the progressives who seek to flood the country with people who have no intention of contributing to British society. It's about Keir Starmer's complete and utter betrayal of the British people. When will the British public wake up to the fact that Starmer is not on their side? How much longer will we allow our country to be sold out by politicians who have no regard for the people they were elected to serve? The UK is on the brink, and Starmer's refusal to take action on immigration is the tipping point. It's time for a change. It's time for leaders who will put the interests of the British people first, not political correctness, not globalist ambitions, not the interests of the elites. Farage has made it clear: this crisis is not only a failure of leadership, it's an intentional betrayal of the nation's core values. As the UK faces unprecedented levels of immigration, the question is no longer whether Starmer will act, it's whether the British people will allow him to continue leading the country into economic and social ruin. The stakes have never been higher, and it's time for the UK to decide: will we continue down this path of destruction, or will we rise up and demand real leadership that protects our borders, our jobs, and our future? Keir Starmer has underestimated Nigel Farage, and now he's about to pay the price. Farage's words ring louder than ever: they can't stop us, we're on the rise, and they know it. Reform UK is not just another political party, it is the only real alternative left standing. While the Conservative Party implodes under the weight of its own corruption and incompetence, and the Labour Party crumbles beneath the pressure of its disillusioned supporters, Reform UK is surging forward. The reality is clear: the British people are waking up. They are beginning to see the truth about Starmer, and it's not the one he's been spinning. Starmer has failed the people of the United Kingdom. And more than that, he's actively sabotaged their future. Under his leadership, Labour has become a puppet for the global elites, sacrificing the interests of ordinary Britons to appease their powerful backers. Farage's warning couldn't be clearer. Starmer is part of the problem, not the solution. As the country's problems worsen, the British public is finally seeing through the facade. Starmer may talk the talk, but his actions betray him. He cannot be the savior he pretends to be because, at his core, he is deeply entrenched in the same system that has brought the UK to the brink of collapse. When Farage speaks, he speaks for the millions of Britons who are fed up with politicians who don't understand or care about the struggles of everyday life. The British electorate has been through enough, and they're no longer willing to stand by while self-serving leaders like Starmer continue to run the country into the ground. The last few years have exposed the deep divisions, the soaring cost of living, the chaos caused by uncontrolled immigration, and the destruction of industries that were once the backbone of the UK's prosperity. And where has Starmer been in all this? Nowhere. But Farage's message isn't just an attack on Starmer. It's a clarion call for revolution. A revolution that begins at the ballot box on May 1st. Farage is confident that this election will be the first blow in what will be a political upheaval. Reform UK is gaining ground, not just in the media, but on the ground, with increasing numbers of Britons realizing that there's only one way out of the mess that Starmer and the rest of the establishment have created. Starmer's quiet confidence, his careful words, and his polished image can no longer mask the incompetence and dishonesty at the heart of his leadership. The British people are no fools. They have seen through the lies, the empty promises, and the false narratives spun by the Labour Party for decades. Starmer represents a broken system, one that is more concerned with maintaining its power than actually solving the issues facing the country. Farage understands that the next election will be about much more than just voting for a party. It's about choosing between the old, failed political order or something new, something bold, and something that actually listens to the concerns of the people. Starmer's Labour Party is done. It's over. The real battle is now between those who want to maintain the status quo and those who are ready to fight for a new Britain, free from the chains of bureaucracy, free from globalist control, and free from the politicians who have betrayed the nation's trust. Farage has made it clear, Reform UK is not backing down, and it's time for Starmer and the rest of the political elite to realise that. The days of complacency are over. As Farage put it, the British people have woken up. And once they wake up, there's no going back. The tide is turning, and it's turning fast. On May 1st, the UK will see the first chapter of a new political era, one where the ordinary Briton has a voice, one where the country takes control of its future again, free from the shackles of political correctness, endless immigration, and the entrenched globalist agenda that has sold out the British people. The question is no longer whether Reform UK can rise, but how high will it go? The establishment knows it is in trouble. They see the momentum building, and they know Starmer can't stop it. The cracks in the Labour Party are widening, and the Conservatives are barely holding it together. It's Reform UK's time, and Farage is determined to prove that his vision for Britain isn't just a dream, it's a movement, a revolution that cannot be stopped. So, the real question is this: will the British people allow their country to continue down this path of destruction, or will they rise up and choose a better future? Farage's words are clear. This is just the beginning. May 1st will be the first strike in a war to reclaim the future of the United Kingdom. The political elites are running scared, and for good reason. They know the tide is turning, and it's heading straight for them. Reform UK is coming, and nothing will stop it.